For most of us, the idea of possession conjures up images from gigantic Hollywood horrors, like Regan's twisted body in The Exorcist, or the unsettling Annabelle doll. We likely think of holy water and Christian priests. After all, only an exorcism can cleanse one of possession. At the base level, possession is often portrayed in the media as a difficult battle between good and evil. But what exactly does possession entail off-screen, in the real world? And where did this practice of exorcism come from? In Possessed, when the devil takes over, we hope to shed light on these questions and more, as we examine the history of demonic possession and exorcisms. Possession is described as a condition that involves a drastic change in behavior and personality. Symptoms of spirit possession include shrieking, indecipherable speech, violent outbursts, unshakable illness, and jarring movements. Sometimes religious individuals who are possessed may struggle to partake in prayer or become afraid of sacred objects like holy water and crosses. All sorts of entities are said to be capable of possessing an individual's body, including angels, demons, or even ghosts. Though possession is often linked with Christianity, especially in the media, the concept exists in many other cultures and religions, including Buddhism, Hinduism, Wicca, and Haitian voodoo, to name a few. These religions often have various spirits with different motives, and the concept of possession is approached in all sorts of ways. For example, in Islam, there are beings named jinn, who are not known to inherit evil, nor necessarily harm, and soothsayers are known to use possession to gain hidden knowledge from these spirits. Meanwhile, in Judaism, there is the Dybbuk, described as a disembodied spirit that roams aimlessly until it finds a living body to inhabit. These spirits can sometimes be harmful. If they are, they can be expelled by exorcism. The earliest mention of demons and exorcisms dates back to the ancient Mesopotamia during the early 3rd to late 1st millennia BCE. At the time, this sort of witchcraft and demonic presence was seen as a very viable threat, capable of spreading illness and bad luck amongst the entire society, not just a few families or individuals. The Mesopotamians strongly believed that deities and supernatural entities were a part of the world, and that demons were a significant concern. Notably though, demons were capable of bringing curses and misfortune. They were also capable of bringing blessings and protection. They were not at all seen as the one-dimensional evil beings that they are often seen as today. In order to combat the worst that demons had to offer, Mesopotamians created protective amulets, invented incantations, and performed rituals which they hoped would appease the gods. Some of the most feared demons at the time included Lamashtu, who was capable of causing harm to mothers during childbirth, bringing disease to infants, and even taking children from their parents, and Pazuzu, perhaps the most notable of the Mesopotamian demons, given his prominence in the 1973 film The Exorcist. The demon of wind, storms, and drought. Though often seen as a particularly malicious spirit, he was known to have protected against other dark forces, including Lamashtu. Cuneiform tablets from the Mesopotamian period, which are basically record-keeping stone tablets, show that illnesses like delirium were believed to be the result of someone being possessed by an entity with bad intentions. When ordinary citizens began exhibiting bizarre and unusual behavior, they would often seek answers in the spiritual realm and would be subject to a series of rituals meant to diagnose, appease, or expel the entity. One such ritual involved the use of a diviner who would study animal entrails and interpret the patterns found within. This would lead the diviner to identify the demon and the problem, and then suggest how to cure the individual. Incantations also played a big part in finding a fix for an individual's issues. But instead of simply repeating words one might expect, Mesopotamians almost put on shows as part of the ritual, using hand gestures and music as part of the routine. These incantations were often designed to bind or banish the entity and relieve the victim of their anguish. Then, in the 1st millennium BCE, the Mesopotamians came up with the earliest concept of an exorcist, known as Asipu. This individual is described as a trained ritual professional. He was equipped with a range of tools and had been blessed with the protection and sanction of the gods. These exorcisms involved, again, incantations, as well as talismans and other rituals. all of which work together to draw the demon out and protect the victim from future possession. But it wasn't just the Mesopotamians who had these deep-rooted beliefs about demons and other entities. In ancient Persia, Iranian religious leader Zoroaster soon rose to prominence. His religion, Zoroastrianism, became widespread by the 6th century, possibly earlier. Some of the teachings from this religion would later influence elements of Christianity and Islam. With Zoroastrianism, the Prince of Evil commands supernatural beings named devas, which are responsible for all sorts of ill-willed behaviour. There are, however, good entities too. While the evil entities are able to possess the living, the good can only possess the dead. Meanwhile, Greek literature contains numerous examples of possession in ancient Greece, which led individuals to carry out acts deemed to be immoral or downright evil, and the Romans carried this belief forward, but added their own spin on things, believing that not only did bad spirits exist, but entities who were not inherently evil did too. This entity, which they called genius, was able to inhabit not just human bodies, but also objects or places. Ruling families were often seen as being possessed by a genius, who gave them the proper authority to govern wisely. These ancient Mesopotamian beliefs seem to have permeated all sorts of cultures and religions over the centuries, not least including Christianity. Christianity has long since held the belief that possession is the result of Satan and demons engaging in spiritual warfare by taking possession of human beings and causing harm to either the possessed body, those around them, or both. They often do this by causing physical and psychological harm. Exorcisms, blessings, and prayers are all used to help alleviate the problem, though it's generally believed that possession is an involuntary condition. There are examples within the Bible that show that this is not strictly the case. For example, Satan was said to have taken over Judas Iscariot's body in John 13:27 because Judas had submitted to Satan. In Catholicism, demons are believed to be capable of much more than voluntary or involuntary possession. Satan and his demons are said to be capable of influencing one's dreams, leading to obsessive thoughts, which in turn lead to suicidal ideation, and of ruining the lives of individuals by spreading misfortune, affecting their health, loved ones, finances, and more. These entities are also able to cause physical pain and infest a house, object, or animal. The first official guidelines for exorcism were established in the Catholic Church in 1614 and were revised in 1999. Some of the signs of demonic possession, according to the US Conference of Catholic Bishops, included superhuman strength, an aversion to holy water, the ability to speak in unknown languages, spitting, cursing, and excessive masturbation. Meanwhile, in evangelical circles, symptoms of demonic possession can include the illness, chronic fatigue syndrome, homosexuality, pornography addiction, and alcoholism. A brief history of exorcisms. As a result of the rapid growth of Christianity, which came during the first 3 centuries CE, other previously accepted religions, including paganism, began to be viewed as evil, and things that did not align with Christianity became things that needed to be exorcised. Anyone who returned to paganism after renouncing it, so that they could be baptized in the Christian faith, was seen as being under the influence of a demonic entity. Aspiring Christians underwent exorcisms every day in the lead-up to baptism, while churchmen carried out exorcisms by laying their hands on the possessed and demanding that the evil entities leave their bodies. In the early Middle Ages, Christians could essentially exorcise themselves by visiting a shrine or praying for help, which would get them closer to God and further away from evil. St. Leo University professor of philosophy, theology and religion Stephen Oakey described exorcism as a prayer or ritual that is meant to remove the influence of demonic, evil power over a person. Is often associated with Catholicism, in part due to the repeated and explicit references to Jesus casting out spirits in the first 4 books of the New Testament of the Bible, also known as the Gospels. The Gospels tell the story of Jesus of Nazareth, whose teaching became the basis of Christianity, and in the Gospel of Mark, written around 70 CE, Jesus is mentioned for the first time casting out evil spirits. Theologian Rob Haskell observed, "In the New Testament, Jesus' exorcisms were evidence of his authority over the devil. They showed that he had spiritual power. Notably, the Bible also contains references to animals being possessed by demons, not just humans. The book's descriptions of exorcisms are believed to be the basic framework for the exorcisms we know today. In medieval Britain, the Christian Church would offer suggestions for how families could safeguard their homes, including placing wax and herbs at the thresholds, avoiding certain areas of towns known to be frequented by devil worshippers after dark, and dousing homes in holy water. Victims of possession were denied entrance to the church and would be forced to stay outside, but would be brought food and prayed over by exorcists. Fasts were also recommended to help remove the entity. In 16th century Europe, the Roman Catholic Church began to fall out of favour as critics began to express their dissatisfaction with some of the Church's newer teachings. During the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church had brought in several new practices and doctrines, including teaching that salvation was possible through good works, which pleased God, and introducing the routine of granting indulgences, which aimed to provide absolution to sinners by reducing the amount of punishment an individual had to endure to be forgiven. Though it was soon banned in Germany, the practice continued. But one German theologian in particular was greatly displeased with the new ways of the Catholic Church. Martin Luther wrote a list of his complaints and allegedly nailed the list onto the door of his university's church in 1517, which ultimately led to the Protestant Reformation. In 1521, he was excommunicated from the Catholic Church. Following this, Luther, who would later be considered a notable reformer of the era, began expressing his own ideas of what Christianity should look like, writing down and printing copies of his doctrine. In 1526, he added exorcism to Protestant baptismal rites, writing that this sort of ritual would be carried out to help babies reject the devil, sin, and evil throughout their lifetime. These exorcisms were not used to expel a demonic force, but rather to protect. They involved prayer and fasting, and sometimes even entire communities participated. Assistant Professor of English, Catherine Walker, who specializes in the history of magic at the University of Nevada, noted that in early modern England, we have many records of fantastic exorcisms conducted by clerics and sometimes by professional exorcists. Some of these latter were exposed as frauds. Eventually, the practice of exorcisms fizzled out amongst Protestants, mostly due to skepticism and hostility towards the ritual. Still, Protestantism continued to spread across Europe and soon hit North America. Numerous religious revivals, referred to as the Great Awakenings, which occurred in the late 18th century, led to the Baptist and Methodist denominations growing within the West and South of the US, while in the early 1800s there was a rise in evangelicalism, and the early 1900s, a similar rise in the Pentecostal movement. In the latter movement, there was a great focus on supernatural elements, including speaking in tongues, faith healing, miracles, and exorcism. Throughout the first half of the 20th century, both movements continued to grow, but the Pentecostal group in particular drew ordinary people in with its promise of supernatural gifts and miraculous cures. During the 1960s, Protestants and Catholics alike began to adopt Pentecostal-style worship, a movement which was known as charismatic Christianity. Charismatic Christians also participated in the ritual of exorcisms, and even well into the 1970s, the practice saw popularity. This demand for such practices grew with the 1971 release of the Exorcist novel, and in 1973 with the release of the film adaptation. In 1994, following the increased demand for exorcisms, the International Association for Exorcists, abbreviated as IEE, was formed. The Roman Catholic organization was created by 6 priests, including Father Gabriel Amorth and Father Jeremy Davis, both of whom were prominent figures in the Catholic Church. Father Amorth was a particularly controversial individual, claiming to have performed at least 60,000 exorcisms during his lifetime. He was recently portrayed by Russell Crowe in The Pope's Exorcist, which was based on Amorth's 2 memoirs. The AIE provides training and support to exorcists and has around 400 members across 30 countries as of 2024. Its membership consists solely of priests who have been authorized by their bishops to perform such rituals, and the vast majority are members of the Catholic Church. The aim of the group is to raise awareness among other dioceses about the increasing number of demonic possessions occurring across the world, and to continue to train priests so they are capable of handling any situation they may come across while performing an exorcism. But it's not just the AIE that seeks to banish demons from their victims. Dr. Richard Gallagher is another notable individual in the world of exorcisms. An Ivy League educated and board-certified psychiatrist, Gallagher teaches at Columbia University and New York Medical College, and spent his early life believing that stories of possession were a way to explain mental illness, particularly in the early years of society, where conditions such as depression, anxiety, and hallucinations had not yet been named and studied. Gallagher was drawn into the world of exorcisms and possession in the late 1980s when he was introduced to a self-styled satanic high priestess. He was approached by a Catholic priest to give his opinion about whether or not the woman was suffering from a mental illness. Gallagher recalled, "I was inclined to skepticism, but my subject's behaviour exceeded what I could explain with my training." He claimed that she could identify a person's weakness and was familiar with the deaths of people she'd never met, including Gallagher's mother, who died from ovarian cancer. Several witnesses claimed that the woman was capable of speaking in various languages, including Latin, that she could not speak outside of her so-called possession. Gallagher concluded this was not psychosis. It was what I can only describe as paranormal ability. I conclude that she was possessed. Dr. Gallagher has worked on hundreds of consultations and claims that through the overwhelming majority of possession, victims are simply individuals with mental health issues. There are simply some cases that he cannot explain. He noted, "There was one woman who was like 90 pounds soaking wet. She threw a Lutheran deacon who was about 200 pounds across the room. That's not psychiatry. That's beyond psychiatry." Referring to himself as a consultant, Gallagher has been helping clergymen distinguish between mental health problems and what he names the real thing. Gallagher claims the same habits that shape what I do as a professor and psychiatrist, open-mindedness, respect for evidence, and compassion for suffering people, led me to aid in the work of discerning attacks by what I believe are evil spirits, and just as critically, differentiating these extremely rare events from medical conditions. Though he says possession is rare, it is real, noting, "I spend more time convincing people that they are not possessed than they are." The possession of Elizabeth Knapp. Let's take a look at some notable possessions that have extensive research and evidence to support them. The case of Elizabeth Knapp is one of the most prolific instances of possession ever recorded. Dating all the way back to the late 17th century, her case is largely seen as a precursor to the Salem trials of the 1690s. Unbeknownst to many, the infamous Salem trials did not happen in isolation. Rather, they were part of a wider trend of Puritan fright. Puritans, like many Christians, believed in the existence of Satan and demons. They also believed that witches worked in tandem with the devil. Events like the death of large amounts of livestock or health conditions like disease and fits led many to conclude that a witch or demonic forces were at play. This led pastors to begin conducting exorcisms to rid individuals of the demons possessing them. In the village of Groton, about 50 miles west of Salem, Massachusetts, lived Elizabeth Knapp, the daughter of a farmer. On October 30th, 1671, she was 16 years old and worked as the servant of a clergyman named Samuel Willard. That night, seemingly out of the blue, Elizabeth began to exhibit bizarre behaviours, including yelling, shrieking, crying, and laughing, and claimed to see shadowy figures in the cellar of Willard's house. Elizabeth's possession was documented extensively by Willard, with the resulting study being described as clinical. Willard himself was a reverend in the Church of Groton and often gave sermons about damnation and obedience to God, frequently warning the youth of the town to be careful, because although God is ready to receive them, the devil is ready to endeavour them. Just after her strange outburst had begun, Elizabeth collapsed to the floor in the midst of violence, where she began to fit, with leapings, straining, and strange agitations. It took 4 men to keep her down and stop her from flailing around and lashing out. During this time, she would yell the words, "money, money, sin, and misery." The teenager continued to exhibit such behaviours in the following days, reportedly having several of these episodes and claiming to have seen visions of the devil. On one occasion, he attempted to enter a pact with Elizabeth while promising such things as suited her youthful fancy: money, skills, fine clothes, ease from labour, to show her the whole world. Some of her encounters with the devil were said to be sexual in nature. She experienced pains throughout her body, grabbing body parts such as her neck and legs and yelling out, after babbling about strangulation. Sometimes she saw two persons walking around her, while on other occasions she saw a man floating around her bed. She once tried to throw herself into the fire. Prayer was used to try and soothe her fits, but this didn't work. On November 28th, Elizabeth's convulsions lasted 48 hours. During this time, she claimed to see mythical creatures in the fireplace. She claimed that she had seen devils in their hellish shapes, and more devils than anyone there ever saw men in the world. Furthermore, she barked like a dog and bleated like a calf. After the 2-day fit, Elizabeth became catatonic. She woke on November 8th and claimed to have been assaulted on various occasions by the devil himself, making a pact with him and allowing him into her bed. Willard would later observe in his writings about the ordeal that during the month of December, Elizabeth continued to suffer from violent fits, taking in an unfamiliar and deep voice and speaking to Willard through her body. All through the winter, Elizabeth battled with her symptoms. Willard noted that the more strangers visited her, the more violent are her fits. On January 10th, 1672, he wrote that he met with the 16-year-old to discuss how she was getting on. She claimed that the devil had control of her body and that he was very powerful, much more powerful than her, and added that he was capable of taking over her speech too. The following night, Elizabeth began crying uncontrollably, and she called for Willard's presence. For over an hour, she was locked into a fit of weeping. She was still in that state when Willard left. Willard stopped writing following this, stating that he would leave further speculation about the possession to those who are more learned, aged, and judicious than he was. Case 2. The Exorcism of Anneliese Michel. Born September 21st, 1952 in Bavaria, West Germany, Anna Elisabeth Anneliese Michel is perhaps the most famous real-life subject of an exorcism, so brutal that it led to her demise. Raised in a deeply religious Roman Catholic family, Anneliese attended Mass twice a week alongside her 3 siblings. Her mother Anna had an illegitimate child in the 1940s that forced her to wear a black veil on her wedding day. She reportedly became fixated on repenting and passing that anxious fixation onto her children. In the 1960s, Anneliese would sleep on a stone floor, attempting to atone for the sins of the drug users sleeping rough at the local train station. When she was 16, after experiencing a severe convulsion, Anneliese was diagnosed with temporal lobe epilepsy. 2 years later, in June 1970, she was staying at a psychiatric hospital when she experienced multiple seizures. Following her 3rd child, she was given anti-convulsion drugs for the first time, but they failed to help the issue. She frequently described seeing devil faces, and later that month, she was given a new medication, Aolept, an antipsychotic designed to treat illnesses such as schizophrenia. In 1973, Anneliese began attending university. She was described as quiet and withdrawn, and her classmates knew her as a God-fearing individual. That same year, her state of mind worsened when she began to experience depression and suicidal ideation. She also started to hallucinate while praying, and frequently heard voices which declared that she was damned and would rot in hell. Another stay in the psychiatric unit did not help matters, and she grew frustrated that all of the medications she was prescribed over the years had not alleviated her issues. Furthermore, she became afraid of religious symbols, objects, and places, including crucifixes and holy water. Following a trip to Italy with a family friend, it was concluded that the 20-year-old was in dire need of help, as she was possessed by a demon. Her family agreed, particularly when her mother believed that she saw stigmata on her daughter. They met with several priests to organize an exorcism, but all of them declined and recommended that Anneliese and her family seek medical help. The Catholic Church has a strict set of requirements that one must meet in order for an exorcism to be carried out, and furthermore, those exorcisms require the permission of the bishop. In the following months, however, Anneliese's condition did not improve. She became aggressive, harmed herself, drank her own urine, ate insects, and allegedly bit the head off of a bird. She began to perform 600 genuflections a day, the bending of one knee, and eventually ruptured her knee ligaments. She was heard through the walls of the house screaming for hours on end. In November 1973, she was prescribed an anti-seizure drug and mood stabilizer, but again, this appeared to have no real effect on her. Anneliese wrote to Father Ernst Alt in 1975. Excerpts from her letters included, "I am nothing. Everything about me is vanity. What should I do? I have to improve. You pray for me. And I want to suffer for other people, but this is so cruel." Alt didn't believe the young woman looked like an epileptic and never saw her experience a seizure, and thus wrote to his bishop and requested that an exorcism be performed on Anneliese. In September of that year, Bishop Joseph Stangl permitted Father Arnold Renz to perform an exorcism on Anneliese, but ordered total secrecy. On the 24th of that month, the first session took place. At Anneliese's request, her parents had stopped consulting doctors, though it has been noted that she was taking a recently prescribed antipsychotic medication around the time that she started to undergo exorcism sessions. She stopped taking the medication sometime in the months before her death. Anneliese's symptoms persisted despite the medication. She was noted to have started growling, seeing demons, and throwing things during her sessions. Anneliese underwent 1 to 2 exorcism sessions per week, each lasting up to 4 hours, across 10 months between 1975 and 1976, totaling around 67 sessions. Towards the end of her life, she began refusing to eat, and the priests orchestrating the exorcisms claimed to have spoken with several demons inside of Anneliese, including Adolf Hitler, Lucifer, and Judas Iscariot. On July 1st, 1976, she died in her home. She was just 23. Her cause of death was listed as malnutrition and dehydration following a year of near starvation. At the time of her demise, she weighed just 66 pounds, had 2 broken knees, was unable to move without assistance, and had contracted pneumonia. In 1976, her parents, along with the priests who participated in the rituals, Ernst Alt and Arnold Renz, were all charged with negligent homicide. In 1978, all 4 were convicted of negligent homicide, but were given 6 months of suspended prison sentences and 3 years probation. Though Pope Benedict XVI was very supportive of the practice, the number of officially sanctioned exorcisms dwindled in Germany following the death. In 2006, Anneliese's mother claimed that they had done the right thing because I saw the sign of Christ in her hands. She does not regret her and her husband's actions. Anneliese was buried next to her illegitimate sister Martha, who died during surgery at the age of 8. Both were laid to rest on the outer edges of the cemetery, described as ground reserved for suicides and illegitimate children. Writing for The Telegraph, journalist Elizabeth Day remarked, "Even in death, Anneliese was not free of the sinfulness she fought so hard to repent of." Case 3. The trial of Arne Cheyenne Johnson. Better known as the Devil Made Me Do It case, the trial of Arne Cheyenne Johnson took place in Brookfield, Connecticut in 1981, drawing national attention when the defendant, 19-year-old Arne, attempted to remove responsibility from himself for the murder of his landlord by claiming that he had been possessed at the time of the slaughter. Arne killed his landlord, Alan Bono, in February 1981 by stabbing him multiple times. It seemed like a pretty clear-cut case. After all, Arne's sister had been there at the time of the crime and had seen everything, signing police statements to that effect. But he rose to infamy when he became the first person to claim a defense of demonic possession in a US court. Though the judge ultimately threw his defense out, to this day, Arne maintains his innocence, claiming, "I've never hurt anybody, never, and I said, there's no way I did this, you got the wrong person." The detective who processed the 19-year-old observed that he seems unable to recall anything about the murder. Still, after the defense of demonic possession was thrown out, Arne was forced to plead self-defense, aiming for a charge of manslaughter rather than first-degree murder. He was ultimately found guilty of manslaughter in the first degree and given a sentence of 10 to 20 years in a maximum security prison. But the story of Arne's possession goes back further than the murder. In 1980, when David Glatzel was just 11, he claimed that he became possessed by the devil. David was the younger brother of Debbie, Arne's girlfriend, and he went to visit the couple at their new home, where he became overwhelmed by an off feeling and soon discovered a burned and black-looking old man who pushed him onto the bed and said he would bring harm to the family if they moved in. Every time David visited, he would see the old man, who had a white beard and was dressed casually. His skin was charred like it was burnt. Following his first encounter with the man, David began to experience night terrors and would wake up in the middle of the night screaming, with newly formed bruises on his skin that he was unable to account for. The Glatzels would later report hearing odd noises coming from their attic. When discussing the spirit he encountered, David recalled it looked like the devil from a Halloween costume. His eyes were black, solid black, just like a chunk of coal, and it scared me. Arne and David would later claim that this encounter led to a full-scale demonic possession. Before long, Ed and Lorraine Warren were contacted by the Glatzels. You likely know the pair as the controversial paranormal investigators who gained prominence in the 1970s after becoming involved with several famous hauntings, including the Enfield poltergeist, the Annabelle doll, and the Amityville horror. The Warrens helped David's family organize an exorcism with priests from the Catholic Church. The Warrens later claimed that David spoke to them in a deep voice, that his toys would move of their own accord, and that a black mist appeared next to the young boy while he was being interviewed by Ed. Lorraine stated, "Soon the child was complaining that invisible hands were choking him, and there were red marks on him. He said that he had the feeling of being hit. At some point during the exorcism, David began to struggle, prompting Arne to intervene. I yelled at this thing at the top of my lungs. I said, 'Leave this little kid alone. Take me on. I'm here. Take me on.' I felt this coldness come over me. Ice cold." Lorraine said, "Oh my God, what did you do?" From this point on, the Warrens and the Glatzel family believed that the spirit that had taken over David's body had shifted to Arne's. They added that 5 months after the exorcism, the demonic entity resurfaced to take over the 19-year-old's body and stab Alan Bono. According to witnesses, Arne had taken the day off work and had spent it with Debbie, who worked at a kennel. Notably, Alan was her boss, as well as the couple's landlord. The trio had lunch with a few others and consumed alcohol. And when returning to the kennel, a heated fight broke out, during which Alan grabbed Debbie's 9-year-old cousin and refused to let her go. This led to Arne confronting Alan and stabbing him. Though he was rushed to hospital, Alan died from his injuries. The oldest Glatzel brother, Carl, does not believe that possession was the reason behind the killing, claiming, "There's nothing demonic about this. Arne was very possessive of Debbie. There was speculation and rumours that Debbie was having an affair with Bono." Reportedly, even the police had their suspicions that the argument between Alan and Arne was likely due to Debbie, who denied having an affair. Debbie stayed with Arne throughout his time in prison, and the two married while he was still behind bars. They had 2 children together and remained married until Debbie died in 2021 from cancer. Arne is still alive. He served 5 years in prison before being released for good behaviour. Christopher Holt, the director of a documentary about the case, The Devil on Trial, told Newsweek, "He's a really lovely man. He does think still to this day that he was possessed." Conclusion. Some historians have proposed that in medieval Europe, exorcism was supposed to cure the body, and that it wasn't until the Protestant Reformation that the practice of exorcism was connected to the idea of possession. Exorcisms at that point were seen as a fix for an unwell soul. Some anthropologists believe that spirit possession should be seen as a way of interpretation, that various cultures and religions throughout the centuries use the concept as a way to explain and make sense of certain phenomena, most notably mental illness and physical ailments. For decades, spirit possession has been linked to mental health. Many skeptics believe that those claiming to or diagnosed as suffering from spirit possession are in fact victims of an undiagnosed and untreated mental illness, while many cultures have recorded that those suffering from possession are experiencing issues, often associated with mental illnesses. For example, if we return back to the Mesopotamians, cuneiform tablets described individuals as suffering from fright or consternation, which could refer to anxiety. Similarly, they described other people as being in a state of stupor or despair, which might be what we would today call depression. The concept of spirit possession and the practice of exorcisms does however come with its fair share of controversy. As well as the example of Anneliese Michel we discussed earlier, there have been numerous cases of exorcisms gone wrong. In California in 2023, 2 people were arrested in connection with the death of a 3-year-old girl. Ali Proctor died from being suffocated and smothered during an exorcism performed by family members at a Pentecostal church in San Jose. Relatives believed she was possessed by an evil spirit. Her uncle and grandfather were charged with child abuse following the killing. Similarly, in 2010, a 14-year-old boy named Christy Bemu was beaten and drowned to death by relatives who'd accused him of witchcraft, while in 2005, a Romanian nun died during an exorcism after she was bound to a cross, gagged, and deprived of food and water for days on end. In September 2023, Pastor Rick Morrow of Beluha Church in Richland, Missouri, came under fire when he claimed that autism was the result of an attack by the devil, claiming, "The devil's attacked them. He's brought this conformity upon them. He's got them where he wants them." He claimed that the so-called cure for autism was prayer, and claimed to know a minister who has seen lots of kids that are autistic, that he cast the demon out and they were healed. And then he had to pray and their brain was rewired and they were fixed. The public backlash Morrow received for these statements led him to resign from the school board, on which he was a member. Ideas like this are not only deeply offensive to many, but they can lead to dangerous situations. 20 years earlier in 2003, an 8-year-old autistic boy was killed in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, after church members performed an exorcism. Like Morrow, those relatives shared the belief that an invading demon was responsible for the boy's autism. It's easy to assume that the need for exorcism will soon be eradicated. This assumption is tied to what is called the secularization narrative, which believes that science will eliminate the belief in the supernatural, as well as the social influence of religion. But surprisingly, the demand for exorcisms has only increased over the years. A 2021 poll showed that 43% of Americans believe in the existence of demonic entities, while several years earlier in 2018, Father Vincent Lampert, the exorcist for the Archdiocese of Indianapolis, said he'd received over 1,700 exorcism requests that year alone, the highest volume of demand he's ever received. Over in Italy, the number of exorcisms requested has tripled in recent years, with experts predicting as many as 500,000 requests are made each year. Dr. Richard Gallagher believes that a preoccupation with the occult and alternative spiritualities are the leading cause of why so many people believe in possession, and believe they are in need of help via an exorcism. Father Lampert agrees with Gallagher's earlier claims that most people are simply unwell and not in need of an exorcism, suggesting that only around 1 among every 5,000 people who claim they are possessed are experiencing the real thing, but that the real thing most certainly does exist. So what do you believe? Are demonic possessions real or not?